Welcome back to another week at DroneDJ. And this week, for those of you who are part of the airplane clubs communities, or if you're in Canada, you probably heard about the rules of Transport Canada canceling MAAC exemption. So MAAC is the Model Aeronautics Association of Canada, and that's equivalent to AMA in states, right, Kirk?
Yes. Also, by the way, today's also Friday, not Thursday. Don't be like me and wake up and think today's Thursday because you'll get a message from Ife be like, "Hey, I'm ready for the start the stream." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool. I'm still."
So someone hasn't done the research yet.
Yeah. Well, I came in this like I watched a little bit of it when you messaged me earlier this week about it, and I'm like, I don't do a lot of the hobbyist like groups. Like I just kind of fly on my own, since you don't need to have that here in the United States, really. And it's not. I live in Wisconsin, which has a very big aviation community, but up in Oshkosh, not
Mhm.
down here in Milwaukee. So I don't really know. I know there's like a few sites down here with AMA, but I don't really know like what they are.
Right.
I know
So
up in
so first
Oshkosh, it's like
let's
it's
talk about
so different.
what is MAAC, what is AMA.
Mhm.
Um, both MAAC and AMA are fairly supportive and encouraging model aeronautics clubs, right?
Yep.
So back in general aviation time, especially at the beginning of aviation, there are a lot of enthusiasts who like to build their own model airplanes, try different things, right? Try different design, fly them remotely, and that's their hobby. So both MAAC and AMA are designed for hobby clubs. So one of the most important thing is actually location. So clubs have their actual designated location where members can go and form a community and fly their network, share information, foster. Right, there's a lot of
Mhm.
youth, fostering youth who are interested in aviation. So many of the pilots who are actually flying planes nowadays, many of them had came through MAAC or AMA in their early days because that's what got their interest, right? Because it's always difficult to go and actually fly a plane, but you can get started with assembling and building little model airplanes and trying them out. So that was really the intent of both MAAC and AMA. Now, I guess the challenge happened when drones came into the equation.
Mhm.
Are drones model aeronautics? Are drones, part of, well, those who fly recreationally with drones, are they still part of that club and adhering to, the rules and the principle of the model aeronautics club? So that was always the one up for debate. And what it really came down to so what happened in Canada in the past few months, actually, they started towards the end of the year in last year, December, when MAAC had done a self-assessment to reveal the compliant status of their flying clubs. And the challenge is they found that about 15 of their sites weren't actually following the safety requirements. And we're talking about especially the sites that are within controlled airspace, so close to major airports. And that's what triggered, they voluntarily disclosed this information to TC, and they've issued a no fly to the clubs to stop flying activities until further notice. Basically, they're trying to find out how to manage the compliant status for their own site. And the reason being is in Canada, again, this is a little different than states. So in Canada, even if you fly recreationally or commercially, you still need to get your pilot license, right? Versus in states, you only get Part 107 if you're flying commercially. But in
Yep.
Canada, you still have to get it as long as your drone is over 250 grams, except when there are exemptions. And MAAC is one of the exemptions. So if you fly on the MAAC club as a member and you follow the safety rules, you don't need to get your drone pilot license. That's
So,
where a lot of the
yep.
FPV guys to race, because for us, one of the main rules of the license is visual line of sight. You've got to have visual line of sight.
Mhm.
And that's why a lot of the FPV members go fly. They have their racing leagues with the MAAC clubs because they're flying. Obviously, they're flying among trees, through obstacles. It's outside of visual line of sight. So
Yep.
MAAC had actually collaborated with the FPV racing league when the new Rex came out. And it's been, working pretty good. So they have their racing, and then MAAC has their model aeronautics, and they're all governed under this exemption. No one had to go get licensed. They do it safely, and it's all good until MAAC discovered their clubs aren't actually compliant to their own safety rules.
Yep. So here's how the show's gonna work a little bit. I don't really have an opinion on this. because one, I'm not Canadian, and also like I don't do the recrees a lot. So the goal is I'm gonna play devil's advocate for whatever the opposite opinion of Ife's. However, I don't know what Ife's
Well,
opinion
I'm
is.
here to talk about facts, right? Number one, I'm here to talk about facts, and number two, we're here to talk about safety. Because safety is number one rule, right? We don't want to have any accidents or incidents happening that's going to hurt the whole industry.
My goal is still going to be trying to find what her thought is, and I'm just going to play the devil's advocate and just see how that goes. Yeah, because I don't, and maybe at the end of it, I'll actually form an opinion because I still don't really have an opinion on it. Because also I don't really know how it all works. But now the more you explain it, the more I understand it. So because down here you can be part of AMA and you don't really have to get a license for anything, but as soon as you do anything commercially, you need to have a Part 107, and so that pretty much makes AMA, at least for drone, and also you don't need to be part of AMA to fly drones. As long as you're not in controlled airspace, you can fly anywhere. There's really no regulations. Well, okay. Every so often, states and cities start signing ordinances and laws that we'll have to figure out whether or not they're constitutional. But as long as you're flying in an area you're supposed to fly in, you don't need to be part of a club at all to be exempt from the rules that are up here in Canada.
Before the current,
it's very, very different down here than it is up there.
So before the current licensing program in Canada was the same thing, right? It was if you fly commercially, then you go apply for the certificate that allows you to fly. But if you fly recreationally, then you can just go fly. That was the rules before 2019, before our pilot licensing program. And the challenge is always people try to sneak through to say, hey, I'm not flying commercially. Or someone who's flying commercially but says, I'm going out for a job versus I'm practicing, or I'm not getting paid, or I'm not putting the content online. So someone can wear two hats to say, half of the time I'm doing commercially, half of the time I'm not. And it always came down to a really difficult justification. It was never easy to put a clear separation line to say what's commercial and what's recreational, right? You can't just say, hey, you register for business and then you're commercial, but if you're individual, you're recreational. That didn't really work. So the new licensing program the approach is called a risk-based approach. So it doesn't matter what you fly for. It doesn't matter the reason you're flying. It's all about, number one, the drone you fly, the weight of it, and number two, where you fly. So if you fly a drone that's over 250 grams and you're flying in complex airspace, like if you're flying close to, a major international airport, then it doesn't matter if you fly commercial or recreational, you have to get a license. And I can see this from, regulation or from enforcement standpoint, is if you fly really close to a major international airport, I would be more worried about the recreational flyers than the commercial flyers when it comes to safety, right?
Now, do Canadian pilots have to go through something like LAANC to get approval to fly close to airport?
Yeah, so we have a nav drone, which is similar, right? So a navigation, Nav Canada controls the or oversees and manages the controlled airspace in Canada. So it is an app, you go online, and it's fairly straightforward. So 99% of the time you have your account set up. If you're not flying in the center control zone, and you can live with a bit lower altitude, like 200 feet, 300 feet, depending on how close you are to the airport, then it's actually instantaneous approval. So basically, you get your drone registration and your pilot certification number verified on the system ahead of time when you set up your account, right? So you do that once, set up your account, and then every time you fly in controlled airspace, you submit where you want to fly, how you want to fly, and like I said, 99% of the time is instantaneous approval. So they basically just know who's flying over there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So again,
it's about the same here in the United States. It's a little different, but pretty much.
Yeah. So going back to, Canada's approach is always, as far as Transport Canada states it, it's always a risk-based approach. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you fly, it's always, or why you fly. It's always coming down to what are the risks associated with your flight. And if it's considered complex or in that advanced operations, then you have to get a pilot license regardless of what you do it for.
Gotcha.
Except MAAC.
MAAC seems to just be it's just a blanket exception to all.
That was always the exemption is if you're on MAAC club and they have their own set of safety rules. So if you follow that, then you're fine. You don't need to get license apart. Actually, license is not the most challenging part. The most challenging part is by having a license, you have to adhere to all the rules that applies to your license, like your maximum altitude, right? Like you have to fly within visual line of sight. You have to respect the manufacturer specifications of your drone. So you can't fly, when it says -10, you can fly in -20, right? When it says wind, up to 40, you can't fly wind up to 50. So there are a bunch of, rules, just like if you drive a car, you shouldn't speed, right? You shouldn't, run over red light. Those are similar rules when it comes to you have a license, you have to follow those rules. Obviously, if you fly FPV, most of the time you're outside of visual line of sight. You're flying around objects, you're racing, right? Or if you're flying, model planes, you assembled it. So that plane probably didn't comply to, the safety standards or manufacturer certification that's filed with Transport Canada. So by being on the MAAC Club and following the rules, you get to do all of those things on MAAC Club and not having to worry about the rules. So that's why the FPV racing guys and those who like to assemble their own model planes and trying different things, MAAC is a heaven for them. But as we saw, the issue is again going back to safety, right? Going back to this is MAAC's own self-assessment that discovered their clubs weren't compliant with their own safety codes.
Now this is only, all these exemptions only live within the MAAC sites, correct? Or they
correct. Yeah, and we have over 400 sites in Canada. Like every major city, there's at least one.
They're not hard to come by, I'm assuming.
They're not hard to come by.
Yeah, and apparently the AMA sites are also not hard to come by. I just haven't looked them up either. So
okay, so I mean those are the general principle.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about specific problems with local MAAC clubs. Number one, even since beginning of time, drones and the RC, the model airplane flyers didn't get along too well. I mean, even among MAAC or RC club themselves, the helicopter guys, so basically your VTOL, your vertical takeoff and landing guys, and the fixed wing guys never really got along. I mean, we have specific I can totally see that.
I can see that they're not getting along. Especially I feel like flying a model airplane around a drone is way worse than having an actual piloted aircraft flying around, because they're both hard. I mean, for both pilots, they're hard to see, but for the remotely piloted, you're looking at the plane. You're not looking behind you, to the left of you, all around to find that little drone. That's also harder to find probably on the ground than it is in a cockpit. And
plus, most of the RC planes are fixed wing, so they have to have their takeoff, runway. They have to have their approach for landing, so they have specific flight pattern. Versus drones can buzz around everywhere.
It's not as elegant as just putting it down on the grass and taking it off.
So that's number one. They have their own internal conflicts. Number two is personally, the clubs I have seen, around Toronto, I haven't seen much of management that's really coming down from MAAC. I mean, first of all, most of them are open fields anyone can step on. And I haven't seen anyone actually validating the membership status.
Interesting.
When you go on site. And plus, I mean, in Canada, we also have, we have 2 exams versus in States, you only have Part 107. But Part 107 is an in-person theoretical exam, right? In Canada, it's 2 exams. You do an online theoretical exam, and that gives you a basic license. But if you want to go for advanced that can fly in controlled airspace, you have to go for an in-person flight exam. We call that the flight review. So that's Transport Canada authorized instructors or flight reviewers. So someone has to actually watch you do a minimum 15-minute flight and make sure you're not crashing, that you know how the drone handling is. So MAAC clubs are supposed to be for recreational activities.
Yeah.
But we have seen flight instructors who actually, do the commercial drone pilot licensing and examination. They've chosen to do that on MAAC sites. Because obviously they have facilities, right? It's difficult, near any major city, it's difficult to find a nice several acres to say, no one bothers me. No private is going to come on. I'm not doing it in a park that a kid is going to run into me, right? So it's always challenging, for a lot of the smaller independent flight reviewers to find a location to do it. So many of them chose to do it on MAAC site, which technically speaking is not allowed. You're not supposed to have commercial activities. And when you do an exam on behalf of Transport Canada, you're getting paid. That's a commercial activity, right? And you bring a non-member onto the site to fly. So
Now,
from what
what
I have
would you
seen
be?
is there hasn't been much of compliance really or management.
Yeah. Now, if you're, I'm assuming that this says you're getting paid, it would be like if you're a MAAC member, you fly a drone on a MAAC site, and you're like, hey, could you get some drone footage while you're doing it? That would probably be commercial, so you'd have to go through and get a license. You wouldn't just be able to do that for MAAC.
Well, again, yeah, so
Yeah, if you're being paid for it, of course. Yeah.
correct. Yeah. I mean, there are so many things that had been happen on MAAC sites that,
Mhm.
not much of
There,
enforcement,
yeah.
management,
There's no TC, there's no Transport Canada people walking around and like managing this at all.
or
Everyone's
MAAC's own people.
yeah, or MAAC people. Okay, gotcha. It's pretty much
And
just
then plus on top of that is it's pretty difficult to get into actually a MAAC member. It's not actually easy. You have to, because
What is the process?
each
Do you know the
club
process?
each club is run by, that affiliated club. So they
Mhm.
have their own designated managing people, and you have to contact basically them to get approval to be accepted as a member.
So
And
there's a possibility of some of these clubs just being kind of like closed off communities that don't let people in there that they don't know. Is there a possibility of that happening or no?
they're just I wouldn't say that they're closed clubs. It's just there's no consistency. Like there
Gotcha.
isn't an actual process to say here are the requirements, here's how we
There's
do
not just
it.
a general form that you fill out and give it to them. You
There,
have to
there's the
like,
general form you give out, and you don't know how long it's gonna take. You don't know if someone's gonna get back to you. You don't know if the
mhm,
club has capacity. And then plus so when MAAC was established, they had pretty good training programs, right? Almost like a
mhm,
master taking in a apprentice type of program, and it's always coming down to someone who's a little more experienced because it's recreational. No one's getting paid. It's voluntary. Right.
yep,
So it's really about someone who has more experience, wanting to foster the next generation, wanting to share their experience and knowledge with the next generation, and inspiring them to get into aviation. That was always the general concept of the model aeronautics clubs is you're supposed to be open, not just open to new members in the next generation, but open to new technologies and new things. And really to me is that principle or that goal has really been lost in the past 10 years. We're seeing them more opposing to new technologies and new things versus being open, to what's
mhm.
new and what's possible.
It's interesting. This is very. I'm like trying to think. Like, I'm just trying to ask questions. Like, I'm just trying to figure out like what the thoughts on this because I feel like just the blanket. So have you even gotten to the point where they just blatantly removed in the story yet? Because I feel like we're talking the whole process. So like they've
I'm
Transit
trying to say
Canada,
it diplomatically, but yeah, a
yeah.
lot of them are
So
are,
they've
are
removed,
plainly rude.
yeah. Well, okay. So we got to the point where like no, so Transport Canada, they've removed now the exemptions
They've
of all this.
canceled. They've
Yeah,
canceled the exemption.
which means this affects both um drone pilots who want to fly at MAAC sites, but also anyone who flies
Uh, so
model aircraft.
only members of the MAC club. So it doesn't matter if you're a drone pilot
Yeah,
or
MAAC
model
members is what I mean.
airplane, as long
Yeah.
as you're part of the MAC club. As of now, officially they have a little over 9,500 members.
Okay.
That's the
So
official number.
with the with I watched a video of a really angry old man talking
Mhm.
about this. That's my only background. So pretty much what happened, so they just signed away that the exemptions no longer exist. Like they're
Correct.
done now.
Yep,
So
and
all
MAC
those
had
members,
officially issued even since December, MAC had officially issued the no fly to its
mhm.
members.
So those members can no longer fly at all.
From some of the clubs I've seen, if your club is
Okay.
in an uncontrolled airspace, the club members can go get a basic license, which means passing the online exam,
Okay.
and they can fly at the club, but they have to now they have to follow the drone rules. They have to follow basically the actual pilot licensing rules. So they
They have
have
to
to fly
follow as
within
close
visual
as
line of sight.
yeah,
Yeah.
as close as a group that isn't regulated, isn't closely watched by anyone. They have to follow it. So you have to go get a course and learn it. But you probably the chance of probably the amount of people that actually like following the rules are like probably pretty
I
low
mean, I
unless
understand
they're
why some of them are
supervised.
angry. I mean, those who
Yeah.
actually follow the rules and utilize, MAC
Hmm.
club to conduct or really for the purpose of practicing and teaching. A lot of MACs are really like granddad bringing their grandson over the summer and try to show him something fun, try to do something fun.
Yeah.
Like to me that part is really nice, and it's those people who actually follow the rules, do it safely, and still try to adhere to the principle. Those are the ones getting angry,
I
right?
have Yeah, I won't mention. I do have like two stereotypes in my head of the people who fly at MAAC, and there's that one who's super nice, and there's the not nice people. And I could totally, I'm just gonna. Those are the two stereotypes I have in my head of MAAC members. Probably like they're in those two factions, and the ones who follow the rules are probably really angry, and the ones who don't follow the rules are probably also very angry because they both can't fly
Right.
at the moment. Okay, so MAAC. So
I mean, it is winter in Canada, so
yeah,
they
it's
are
also
working
winter.
on.
So
They're
the amount of people are
aiming to
flying.
have something in place by mid-April of this year. So
Yeah.
before spring, before the official flying season starts here in Canada.
Okay. Is there any information I might need to form my opinion?
Have
Because
you formed
I'm
your, have
forming
you
it.
formed your opinion?
I think I'm forming it, but I want to make sure I don't have more information. First of all, I want to take a guess. I think Ife's opinion is that she's just frustrated with the whole system as a whole, and that's just her opinion.
Well,
And then,
okay, so let me speak my own opinion.
okay, that's my guess. You go ahead.
My opinion is on the bigger level, MAAC as the organization
Mhm.
needs to sort, their management out.
Okay,
They need to
frustrated with the
have
whole
a
system.
way. Yeah, they need to figure out what is it they're doing and how they're actually being compliant, how they're actually
Yeah.
managing their members.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a very valid thing to do. Like any sort of group, I should just go check out the local AMA group and just see how they're run and just compare it. Maybe we can compare between MAAC and AMA. But so here's I think this is my opinion. I think what probably happened was I bet lawmakers tried to find a way to separate the drones and the model aircraft. And they couldn't write it in a way that actually would separate it because there would always be the gray area. And so they just did was, okay, well, we can either continue to have these issues with, because drones are just inherently, I think, more problematic than model aircraft just because they are smaller, easier to obtain, easier to fly. Anyone who has any sort of more bad intentions, just the bar is way lower.
Right.
So they continue to have this kind of this loophole around the whole licensing system. Or they just shut it all down and they don't have a loophole anymore. They've pissed off a lot of model aircraft people. They can still go and fix it and just get a basic license and fly, or get there's still a way for them all to fly. It just shuts down that loophole. Or at least what I look at as a loophole. So my opinion is it's not a terrible decision. It's probably, I think if I had to make a decision, I would probably make the same decision.
I'd say it's meant to happen sooner or later.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and
conflicts have been boiling for a while.
And I don't know what would happen here in the United States because I don't think I don't know how big model aircraft are in the United States. I think it's pretty big, but I don't. Also, we already have a pretty robust system for drones for use, and we're coming up with a remote ID as well in the future for requirements. So we have a pretty remote system for drones that are separated from model aircraft. So I think this is kind of like a Canada kind of this is an old system that we had that we kind of have to fix.
Okay, so my take on the remote control community, actually for me, when I was a kid, my dad actually opened the first RC shop in my city with remote control cars and airplanes when I was in grade school, right? So I grew up, building it and having fun with it, and I loved it. And to me, is I want to see the clubs. It's almost like the newer RC clubs are like your STEM camps. Right, that's where kids are going these days. They're not going to the actual RC clubs anymore. They're going to STEM camps. They're going to, robots competitions. That's where they're going. That's the kind of the new and hip and groovy things these days. Versus like when I was younger, it was RC was, the cool thing that all the kids are doing.
Yeah, I remember growing up having kids. I have kids in my class getting like a remote control plane. It was more cars, but there was a lot of planes too.
Yeah, but that was the cool thing to do when we were kids. I'd love to see, basically to me, I like to see MAAC coming up with the feasible business plan. Because although it's a non-for-profit, although it's a club, but every club needs to have, sort of a vision and a business plan that can evolve over time. And so far, it hasn't. So what I can see is even in Canada, the actual having an actual location for people to fly and having some structure and facilities on site is difficult to come by. So if I were them, I would talk to STEM camps I would actually try to, rather than just dealing with the FPV racing guys, I would try to actually, I mean, their whole mandate was getting youth inspired into aviation, into technologies,
Yeah.
right? Why not, collaborating with
Yeah.
STEM camps and having some kids camps and get them exposed to different technologies?
What is the route with the FPV drone racing now that in Canada, now that the MAAC exemption is gone? Like, because you say in the licenses,
You
you still have
can't
to have
fly.
visual
Yeah,
line of sight.
licensing, you have to do visual line of sight.
Is there
So, I
any
mean,
exemption in with TC that lets you do? You have to be able, like, there's no way the entire country of Canada it's illegal to fly FPV drones.
so two ways you can do it. One
Okay.
is you can have spotters, right? So as a
Okay.
pilot, you
Yeah.
can wear goggles, but you
Yep.
need to have a spotter, someone who can still keep a visual on where the drone is. And
Gotcha.
then the other one is if you really want to do beyond visual line of sight, you have to go through the what we call
The
special flight
BV
operation
laws.
certificate.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Okay.
PV
Okay.
laws,
So
SFOC.
it's the same pretty much as US. You have to have an
Yeah.
observer
And I
or
mean, should there be better rules to allow,
yeah.
FPV and a little bit of beyond visual line of sight? If you ask me, yes, there should.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we
Although I
don't
think
have
that
that
having
right now.
just having an observer is probably just fine for FPV work, at least. Just if you're doing FPV stuff, you should probably always have it. Like, if you're gonna do drone recently,
Even with the
like,
observer, because you're flying
yeah.
around, you're maneuvering around objects. Even with
Because
observer, it's not like the observer is gonna go run along the drone and making sure,
yeah.
they're always keeping an eye on it.
Yeah. I mean, like, with like the drone, you're always gonna have people there. Like, you just have officials there when you're doing a race that can keep an eye on the
You
drones.
can have there
And
used to be
then
also what's called the MAAC sanction events. So they can
mhm,
also sanction events in different locations when, like almost like a miniature air show, right? Like an RC based air show. You can still have those. Um, I mean, we were always talking, like, especially for FPV guys, we were always saying, yes, we understand, even if you're 1 millimeter off the ground, that's federal airspace and you're governed by airspace. But would be nice to say if I'm on my own property and I'm flying, or somehow I can make sure I'm flying, let's say 10 meters and below, right? I should have a little more freedom to doing that. So far, we
yeah.
don't.
Yeah, it seems like there's like it's just like, where's the line? I guess, like, of what's safe and what's not.
Well, we
So
need Skynet, I guess.
yeah, is that your version of remote ID? Or
Almost, yeah.
okay,
Because my opinion on remote ID is, from drone perspective, we're happy to put remote ID on. We're happy to broadcast our location,
mhm,
intentions, altitude, etc. As long as the counterpart from general aviation is doing the same. As long
yep,
as they're enforcing the small single engine, airplanes to do the
yep.
same.
Especially or have the same rules where we need to have remote ID if we're flying in controlled airspace, but if we're in uncontrolled airspace, we don't need to have remote ID. I feel like that's also a good compromise, but that's not going to happen because
Agree. Yeah,
it's
basically,
already
it needs
written
to be.
in law and it's already going to happen. So it's there's no changing it now. It's everywhere. So now you have to change the other counterpart. Like, okay, fine, put remote ID, put ADS-B in every aircraft, require it no matter where you are, ADS-B. But then again, also the FAA, which has very low abilities to regulate its pilots already. So being able to
Well, same thing here in
add a
Canada.
new
Like,
regulation to
we have
regulate.
we have rules, we have regulations. We don't have much of
Mhm.
enforcement, right?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's every kind of like aviation authority has that same problem where they just don't have enough. There's more pilots than there are uh, anything else. So I guess I guess we're going off the tangent here, but put it inside the plane. We can't. It's inside the drones for us. We don't have a choice to put it
Hmm.
on. So go to Cessna and be like, ADS-B is built in. You can't turn it off. So all right, that's enough of a tangent on remote
Yeah,
ID.
that's enough on this one subject. I know we're supposed to see updates before April, so we'll stay
Yep.
close, on this subject and get updates for everyone. Now, just to wrap this up, while this is happening in Canada, in June, FAA is actually
So
allowing the night flight request for recreational flyers,
yeah,
which
I
is a good
saw
news.
this. Yeah, I saw this come out, and I'm like, oh, I have to bring this up to EFA because we're already doing the MAAC thing. We have to talk about the FAA making things easier. I tried playing with Aloft. So the thing is that Aloft, at least Aloft announced it. I don't know if it's just Aloft or if it's going to be all LANC providers. Is allowing with the FAA to, if you want to fly during night, because usually if you're recreational, you have to fly between dusk and dawn. You can't fly anytime
Daylight.
between. You have to have daylight, and now you can use the LANC request to fly during night, make the request and get approval from the FAA to fly just for recreational use. I tried playing around with a Loft app the other day and I couldn't find it. Maybe it just hasn't been updated yet. It sounded like it was already out there, but maybe not. Maybe it's coming in a future update. However, that's
It's an
awesome. Like,
improvement. It
yeah,
is
I
an
didn't even
improvement.
know. I didn't even know until I played around with the LAANC. I just always assumed that like I don't have like my a license set up with a Loft yet, so it's just the base app. I thought you just needed to have a license to even like make a request. So I would just it gave me the automatic approval just even to fly in the airspace with without a license set up in it. So I don't know. So I guess now LAC, yeah, I guess it's able to be used by more than just Part 107, especially the night, which was it was already like I think you had to get a waiver, period, no matter if you had a 107 or not. So now you can do just a straight plant request, which is so much easier than doing
Yeah, I do like
anything else.
requests through the app. It is
Yeah,
much easier
it's
for
just
sure.
so much easier, and it just sometimes recreational pilots want to get that nice shot of the city skyline or something like
Yeah,
that
I
with the
mean,
drone. Yeah.
especially if it's at night.
hmm
I do
Well,
like
you
perspective
have
is
less
very
flights
different.
anyways. It's
Yeah,
actually I think flying at night while is nerve wracking when you start doing it.
it's good
Is
practice.
safer. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's actually safer than when you would find it today because there's no crop dusters flying around. There's no general aviation, like enthusiasts flying their Cessnas or whatever or Bonanzas flying around at low altitude. Commercial flights are not as prevalent at night as well. The only thing you really have flying around, even it's not even that prevalent here in Milwaukee, is it's cargo.
All
Yeah,
I
it's
was
cargo
gonna say
and birds.
birds.
Birds don't fly as much during the night either, unless they're nocturnal. But there's not a lot of nocturnal birds here in Milwaukee either. So that the biggest issue is seagulls, and they sleep at night. So, uh, like I feel
So
like it's actually nicer to fly at night than it is at during the day
So the
sometimes.
headline reads, MAAC issues no fly in Canada, while in the meantime, FAA is allowing night flight for recreational
Yeah,
flyers.
yeah, it's kind of it's kind of the complete opposite going on right now, which is usually not how it works for the United States. Usually the FAA is
The other way
much
around.
slower or
Yeah.
restricting things. So
Well, that's all we got for you for this week. We'll see you back here next week.
have a good one.